Okay, so in the beginning of the book, Delarobia is kind of grappling with herself and trying to figure out or like make this decision to go up a mountain and have an affair and cheat on her husband and like in a sense throw away her life. Um, and she's very unhappy with herself. She's very unhappy with like how things have went and how things are going. She definitely feels very like stuck. So when she kind of makes the decision to like say that she's gonna go up the mountain, go meet up with this man, and essentially cheat on her husband, throw her life away, she's not really thinking like, oh, afterwards. She's just thinking about in the moment that she's stuck and she's unhappy. And I think that that theme carries through pretty much through the entire book, where we kind of see her like coming out of that, coming out of her rut, like finding herself, finding something for herself to do. And I think that that's super important, and that's a super important theme throughout the book. And then, of course, when she's climbing the mountain, she sees the butterflies, and that just like brings us into that like mystical kind of like miracle that they all think that this is, because she has no idea what it is. She has no idea what these things are. She thinks that the mountain's on fire, and they kept her from cheating on Cub. She turns around, she runs away, and I think that's also like obviously a really important fact because the butterflies carry through the whole story. But the fact that that one thing, that like all it took was one thing for her to kind of realize like, oh, this isn't what I should be doing. Like this isn't where I want to be. That's really important. And then obviously when it becomes the butterflies, but and then her kind of like holding that with her and not knowing that this miracle or this fire or whatever these things are, that they are butterflies. And then kind of when they all found out, like she pretended to be shocked with them and pretended to kind of be like in that awe, like, oh, what is this? Um, yeah, it was really interesting. And then just kind of going off of that, like going from that, we kind of see the relationship with Delarobia and with her family, with Cub, with Hester, with Bear, all of those sorts of things, and we like it really just gets played out for us in like the first, I would say maybe like 4 chapters, just like why Delarobia feels so stuck in her life, why she seems so like unhappy, just because that's not something that I personally say would like be enjoyable, especially when she feels like everything's been like hung over her head, like she has nothing of her own. So then we get into the butterflies, and it's like, oh, she has this thing that she saw, and then even that kind of becomes everyone else's. So her kind of like going that way, seeing that, having it be her miracle, then having it kind of taken from her, and then like kind of diminished by her family. Like I think it really portrays how stuck she was and how her life was kind of just like on this repetitive cycle of like her husband, her children, like the lambs, the sheep, doing all of those kinds of things. And then like we see these butterflies just like bring out all of this in her. And then on like going back to the butterflies, it being how she ends up getting the job and how she ends up connecting with Ovid and how it ends up kind of like taking her away from that place. I think that those are just things that like the themes of the book carried from like chapter 1 to chapter, what was it, 14 or 15. Like they just completely carried through the whole story. And the way that the author depicted these butterflies as like the miracle in the beginning, and they really did end up being Delarobia's miracle, although there was like hardship and things like faced through that, it was definitely Delarobia's miracle. um and then I guess kind of going off of that, how Delrobia felt stuck, I think that going into like near the end of the novel, she really felt more open like with her children. She felt more open with like Hester, and just having like speaking her mind, not being afraid to get into a fight with Cub, and then just them both like putting it off, waving it over their shoulder like it's fine, it happened. Like she just seems so much more herself by the end of the book. So getting stuck and then kind of like, I don't know, like I feel like as soon as she came down the mountain after seeing the flames, the miracle, she was just a different Delrobia. And I think that that's like the testament to the theme of the story, is that she gets there and pretty much.
So like adding on to the like miracle side of it, where it was and how that kind of affects Stella Robia's relationship with her family is like Hester is really big in the church and kind of believes in like God creates miracles and God is the cause So with Della Robbia and her history with the church, how she's not as connected, um, I think really plays a big role into why she has a lot of tensions with her families because she feels disconnected. She doesn't have that same connection um, that all of the Turnbows have with God and with each other and their beliefs. She sees things in a different light. So with the butterflies being her miracle, um, and not something caused by God, it's caused by nature. Um, that kind of lets her have something of her own that she can connect to, rather than connecting to her family. And then what else? I'm trying to think of what else. She is really big on like protecting the butterflies, and how they're her thing. Um, so when Hester wanted to like do tours of the butterflies and like charge money for it, she was really protective of like not doing that, and just letting people embrace the nature and seeing it. Which even then, she was still hesitant on even letting people see them to begin with because she wanted them for herself. Um, and then when Bear and Cub and Hester wanted the loggers to clear the trees out from where the butterflies were, that's when she realized she had to share the miracle with everyone. And then when Ovid came from New Mexico, was another person she had to share the butterflies with. And so that kind of need to share kind of was like a catalyst and like how the like whole turn of events happens like throughout the book, where the news, all the media, the tours, having the family from Mexico come and see them, um, and it just like continues on. The whole town knowing about it really makes it to where it's not just a small feat. It's like this massive ordeal that everyone needs to know about. And then once Ovid started his like research with his students about it, it's kind of, and then realizing it's like because of climate change and all this, that's when it's like, okay, everyone really needs to know about it because this is affecting a massive population of butterflies and they need to be protected. Um, really does feel like you're talking for forever. And then kind of having all the kids know about the butterflies and nature and why everything's happening and even connecting it to the lambs and the sheep kind of lets them learn from their minds that have been raised like in the future, if you will, how they've all been raised with smartphones rather than like corded phones. Kind of lets them learn from the job that they probably wouldn't learn in school about climate change and all this and protecting wildlife, where many of the families around the area wouldn't have learned all of that had it not been for Delarovia finding out about all the butterflies and like causing all the research to happen and having it all in the media. It lets them kind of lets the outside world see into this small population, this really small town, and then lets the small town see outside of their own units, their own families. Yeah, that's about it.
I got 30 more seconds.
Okay, well, Claire stopped at 30 seconds too, so.
Just go again.
Alright, whenever you said that then. I guess to keep going on the small town part, I think part of like what this book like really got me intrigued with was how it was able to so well tackle how climate change affects small communities like this and how isolated they are as well. Because before seeing the butterflies, Delrovia did not see any way out at all. Towards the end of the book, of course, she figured a way out. But if she had never seen those butterflies or anything like that, she probably would have ended up just like Hester did. And speaking of the intangibles between Hester and Della Robbia. They're pretty much the same coin on two different sides. Hester is the version of Della Robbia that never got out, and so she became. I think that's why she was bitter towards Della Robbia for most of the book, and why she was this evil mother-in-law, because she saw herself way too much in Della Robbia, and she really hated that she trapped herself by having what was the pastor's name?
Bobby.
Bobby. Yeah, by having Bobby, and there's also of course Cub, and she puts Cub on this pedestal and always blames Della Robbia for everything that happens, even when most of the time it's Cub's fault for not really standing up to her, standing up to Bear or anything like that, and just going along with whatever. And he's kind of a negligent father as well, so I don't. I kind of see why she kept trying to put him on this pedestal, because she didn't want what happened to her to happen to him, but it still did. So I think she blamed Della Robbia for that, and also that she saw Della Robbia in herself. So she just hated it with pretty much everything she could, and she probably resents her even more now that Della Robbia actually left. And there's even more parallels with the two people, because Hester knows a lot about native plants, native flowers in the forest, and just like Della Robbia's mother, it's knowledge that is not needed anymore. I can't remember the quote. I think it was like how sad it is to have the answers to questions that are never asked, or something like that. And honestly, kind of personally wrong, because I'm a fan of history and old skills and stuff like that, and nobody really needs them anymore. Um, like sewing machines, people don't really do it by hand anymore unless you're crocheting. Okay, I'm getting off topic. To kind of flip back to the book, when talking about the Mexican family that visited, I think I can draw a connection to how immigration is affected by climate change. Like when we watched that video, those people only tried to immigrate into America because their town got wiped out by a flood that was probably directly caused or inflated by climate change. And the same thing happens to the butterflies, same thing happened to the Mexican family, and that's why Della Robbia was like, just let them see the butterflies, because she empathized greatly with them. And honestly, the butterflies brought you two said, they brought an even bigger divide between Della Robbia and her family, because after she saw them, she started standing up to them, and usually she'd just be like, fine, whatever, just like Cub would. But after the butterflies and Hester and Bear tried profiting off of visitors and whatnot, she immediately was like, no, we're not going to do this. And to the pretty much the very end of the book, she kept fighting with Cub over the logging pretty much nonstop. They kept having fights about it. They had one right in the middle of a Christmas shop, which in that little section, actually, you could see some resentment from Della Robbia towards Ovid, because there's a little paragraph or so about how the butterflies were hers. They were her miracle, her thing, her tourist trap or whatever. And Ovid came and knew so much about them, and suddenly there wasn't hers anymore in this little town where she didn't really have anything or any real control. What can I say for 20 seconds? Actually, no, that would take longer than a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, we just lap it.
Oh, I forgot. Oh yeah, just to show you, we have a timer. Just so you don't think I'm like touching stuff over here, but.
No, she is. She's messing with it.
So to go kind of off of Della Robbia and the miracle, and like it being not Della Robbia, but like Ovid and it being her thing, I think there's a lot of resentment from like the different sides, like going on, like the farmers and the scientists, and it gets into that a lot about like when Cub doesn't believe, like when he and Della Robbia are fixing the fence, like he doesn't believe in that like climate change is what's causing this, or like she'll say global warming and he just stops listening. And I think that's like one of the biggest divides in the book. That's like when they say that the butterflies became a conflict between people. I think that's like a really big, that is like one of the bigger themes in the book because it separates so many people, but then like brings them together at the same time. And I think it brings together like Delarobia and Ovid, and like Dr. Byron gives her the opportunity to leave and like go find something better for herself. But then it separates her and her family. It separates her from Bear and from Cub and from the kids. And it separates Hester from her old beliefs and the way that she always thought that, you know, she was on this high horse, she was on this pedestal. Like this was the way that she lived her life. And now she's kind of just like giving in a little bit to Delarobia, like confiding in her, crying in front of her. Like we see that character development like kind of change through her points in the book. And then I guess going back to like Delarobia and Dr. Byron. Like Delarobia has no knowledge of these things. She has no scientific background, but she has work ethic and she has a desire, and that just like brings her into the lab. And then as she starts to open her mind, you can kind of see like the town almost start to open her mind. Like she's the spokesperson for these beliefs. Like she's kind of at the forefront of this issue, and then it kind of gets like brought about, especially in like Cub, and the way that she presents these ideas to herself and then to like Preston, it just gives her that sense of like, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what I can take in, how much can I convince them to take in. And I think that she does a good job, and in the end it kind of just shows like, okay, I'm leaving now, and like she did her best, she gave what she could, and she went from being absolutely done with this place to fighting for the butterflies, to fighting for these ideas, to trying to get other people to see them as well, to, okay, I did what I could, now it's my turn to go and do what I need to do for myself. And I think that like her character development through that, you know, like the final scene where she's looking over the flood and she's like, okay, well, I'm leaving. It's kind of it's very powerful and very like, I don't even know, like empowering for her to be able to say, okay, this is happening now. I told you guys this was going to happen. This is what you're seeing happen, and now I'm leaving. And I'm going to go figure out, you know, the science behind this, or like whatever it may be. It is.
Actually, kind of it kind of reminds me of just climate activists everywhere. They're just like, I told you so.
Right, exactly. It's just her big I told you so moment. And she kind of got to get away from all of that. But kind of touching on, like you guys both said a little bit about how she said that it was her miracle and how she was like upset about like the scientists being there and kind of like taking that from her. I think she also like developed or like came out of that like mindset of like, I'm poor, I have nothing. I think she starts to realize that like her knowledge is her weapon, her gift, her, you know, that's what she has is her knowledge and her, like, I think she's a very compassionate character. I think the way that she acts towards her children and the way that she begins to act towards other people, like she has very little, but now she's giving her time, she's giving her resources, her backyard, she's giving whatever else to this cause and to these scientists. So I think that's another testament of just like, it's not about what you have or what you can do, it's about like how you present yourself to the world. And she was definitely very conflicted in the beginning, as I've said a couple times now, but she just like completely comes down from that. Like she quits smoking, you know, she starts standing up to her family, she starts standing up to Cub, and like not just sweeping the arguments under the rug. Like she gets her point across, she is heard. And I think all of those things like correlating together make Delarobia, but they also make the novel because it goes on those notions of this is what I believe, this is what you believe, these are my facts, these are your facts. I can get some of it, but we don't see eye to eye. And just like we watch that kind of all come together and string together. And that's like, obviously that's the point, but it's very interesting. And I think that quote, like the butterflies became a conflict between people, is so like, it just hits the nail on the head. Like, and I think it hits the nail on the head with any issue, like not just the butterflies and not just climate change. Like we see these themes everywhere, but I think for this being like a novel about climate change, it brings it into perspective for people who don't believe, people who do believe, people who are on the fence, people who don't have the knowledge. It just brings that perspective and is like, there's this one thing, but it's affecting all of these people. And that's really where I think that the most like engaging parts of the novel come from, is that you can apply this to any issue, and especially the issue of climate change. And even as people who don't believe, I think that like reading this and delving into this, you can see like, okay, yeah, this is happening, and it's gonna affect you, but maybe not me, but maybe this town and maybe over here. And I think that's just one of the most important like themes and concepts.
You were saying about the like divide and stuff, and the like scientists versus like the farmers.
Mm-hmm.
I think like another big like thing about that is that the way that they approach each other in their views, where it was the scientists come with all this knowledge and like education and all that, when farmers don't have that, they don't, but they have more practical life experience. They are learning more physically rather and like hands-on rather than in textbooks, and that divide is kind of that was tripping me up. Was kind of like a big like part of the novel. I think was that it's like they're learning how to adapt to one another and learning each other, learning each other's perspectives and how they learn, like how the grad students were learning about sewing and stuff. Like, not to go 360 here, but it was like
We go in the same direction.
anyway. It was just a big way in the novel to show like how even though you can come from like two sides, you can still learn about the same thing in like your own way and still kind of get that message across. So like learning about climate change and how Delarobe was like, I told you so, this is how it's gonna happen. And the like Cub and Bear and Hester, like they were trying to learn but they weren't really adaptive to learning about it, rather than how Ovid and the students were like more learning about it in like a more textbook way, because they kind of already knew climate change was a thing. It was just in the environment, they're not used to that environment, so they're trying to learn through that environment. And how then when the flooding happened, like, and Delarobe did her whole big "I told you so" fuck you moment.
I told you so.
And went to go learn like more textbook style. It was like that was her way of like escaping, was because that's her learning style, and like how she was able to come from a certain background of being a bit more poor, not having those resources, but that's the way she can learn, rather than how like when the students come from like better backgrounds in comparison, where they have the access to computers and more modern technology in comparison. What else?
They also grew up doing stuff like that, like
Oh yeah, yeah. They were able to like grow up with that environment, whereas like Preston and Cordy are like only just introduced to smartphones, and how Delarobe wanted to get Preston the laptop or computer, whatever, so then he could learn more like she wants to, and like he could learn more like the students, being able to have that access would like be better. She thought having that access would be more beneficial to him, whereas Cub was like, fuck no, he's a farm boy and he's gonna learn how to live on the farm and learn how to deal with these sheep. So yeah, I think that was like a big part of that divide, was like really massive in the book, and I think that was like one of the biggest reasons why like we saw Delarobe's growth so much, because she was able to find her niche, if you will, and like take that and grow her confidence and be able to stand up to her family, stand up to her community, stand up to the media, and like try and educate the way that she knows people's backgrounds would understand, with her learning from a different background, if you will, like more textbook to less textbook, something like that.
excellent enough. To go back to what you said, like kind of said, you mentioned media. There was a third scientist, what was his name, Pete?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And he, when Delarobe was interviewing the scientists and getting like and asking questions that she didn't know fully about the butterflies and whatnot, Pete, who for most of it was just silently putting stuff up on a board, suddenly turns around and starts bad mouthing journalists, not journalism as a whole, but the journalists he had interacted with, calling pretty much clickbaiters, talking about how they use big Facebook titles. In class, we kind of had a correlation versus causation thing about it. And we also talked a while about how it just gave actual journalism a bad rep, because when journalists like that exist, where they just write stuff that has a big fancy title, like about climate change and how they will write anything if it means they get paid, it really shuts down the journalism aspect of just writing the truth, even if it's really boring. And we even talked about how it's like government-backed journalists don't care about that, and they write the truth, and that's typically what the heck is going on
Oh, shoot. Why do we all look depressed?
We've been staring at the camera for like, that's how we've looked.
What do I do? What do I do?
Just close it.
It's still going.
Can it hear us?
How about you stop it?